Hello, and welcome to The Charge Cycle, an electrifying new podcast on all things fleet electrification. I'm Todd Trauman, I'm the CEO of Emission Control. If you are a procurement manager, a fleet operator, or one of the millions of people tasked with a zero-emission deployment goal, this podcast is for you. We speak with industry experts, funding experts, OEMs, and many others to help you stay ahead of this enormous electrification shift underway. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Charge Cycle, an electrifying new podcast on all things fleet electrification. I'm Todd Trauman. I am the CEO of Emission Control, and today, two very exciting guests today, including Luis Barreto and Glen Stancil. Luis, he's the co-founder and president CFO of MegaFlux. MegaFlux is a one-stop shop solution for electric vehicle deployments focused on mass transportation and last-mile delivery, including it being an OEM for a lot of fleets that are looking for that service. Glen, he's the CEO of Merge Fleet. They are fleet electrification experts and have worked very closely with MegaFlux on analytics, benefits, and deployments of EVs. Luis and Glen, welcome to the Charge Cycle.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
So I would like to just get a little bit of background on you guys personally. I know that you guys both have a long history, not just in the electrification sector, but in the clean energy sector, investment sector. I'd like to start with you, Luis. Tell us a little bit about where you came from before getting around to MegaFlux.
Sure. My background is really in finance, hence the CFO part. And I spent the first half of my career doing banking, so investment banking in cities like New York and London. I then went into the private equity world, and I spent 12 years with Brookfield Infrastructure investing globally, really, but with a big focus in Latin America for a while, and then North America, and in particular, the transportation sector. I got engaged with MegaFlux about a year ago. I've known the family that's really incubated the business for many years, and we partnered together to help really bring this out to market in the most efficient way and with the most attractive business plan for our customer base.
That's fantastic. And I'm going to loop back around, kind of get into a little bit more detail about what MegaFlux is and what you guys do and kind of the holistic approach you guys take here. But Glen, give us give a couple of minutes on your background here. I know it's got some backgrounds focused on EVs specifically as well.
Yeah, real quick. I'm 30 years in energy, including 20 years in power and the last 10 years in EV. In those last 10 EV years, our teams designed, built, and operated charging services at probably over 1,500 sites across 42 states. So we've been very deep in the EV market on the infrastructure side. I've driven EV since 2011 when I got my first Leaf. I think I had a couple of Leafs and have a Model 3 now. So I've been an avid believer in electrification and have lived it. I think I've got a pretty good perspective across the value chain, from everything from the user experience to the economics and the technology that supports it. So very deep into electrification.
That's great. So I know your companies work very closely together. I'd like to start with MegaFlux, Luis. I love the fact that you guys are also headquartered in Mexico. I think in Mexico City, if I'm not mistaken there. I'd love to talk about some of the geographic differences in these different markets, but I want to save that for a little bit later. Take a few minutes. Tell us what MegaFlux is. Tell us what you guys do. Tell us how private businesses or municipalities or whoever your prime customer is really work with you guys. What is your core competency here?
Sure, absolutely. And give you a little bit of context and history. So my partners in this business, one set of the partners, is really a family that's been in the manufacturing of electrical equipment, motors, and generators for over 80 years now. So they have been incubating the building of a powertrain for electric vehicles for almost 15 years now. And they were coming to market last year with a product, and that's when I came in and joined the business. And one of the things we've done since then is continue to refine the business plan. And one of the big findings we found as we continue to chat with clients and learn more about their really approach to and execution of the electrification of fleets, we realize that there's a big gap in what the end user or buyer, if you will, of vehicles knows and what they really need to know to be able to effectively deploy the fleets. So we've tried to expand the plan so that we really can help our customers go from zero knowledge and understanding, but an idea and a goal, to the full deployment of that fleet over time. So we do both the vehicles, the charging infrastructure. We help with service and support in the medium and long term. We do driver training, and we work with financial partners to finance all these into the long term for our clients. We've taken a focus on really B2B or large fleet owners more particularly, and we're tackling that across a couple of different sectors. But if I were to kind of focus on what I think the biggest opportunity is, we do a gamut of class 2 to class 8 vehicles, but I think the sort of class 6 to 8 is really where we see a very interesting and attractive space. So that's in effect what MegaFlux does. We went commercial last year. We've already built several trucks for a couple of different customers, and we're looking to grow. We see tons of potential globally, really, for electric vehicles. One other thing that I'll say that I think, in some way distinguishes us is that we come into this fresh in the industry. So we are taking a very, I would call it, view from the electrical world when you think about the deployment of infrastructure and thinking of the plan, and call it a utility approach. So we really try to think long term with and for our clients. So as we talk about what their needs are, we really want to talk about what their needs are going to be for the next 5-20 years, to really be able to build the right infrastructure and get the right vehicles into their hands so that they can fulfill that mission over those long periods of time. And the other big focus that we put is efficiency. This is a reflection not just on price, but ultimately it's in the construction of all that we do, from how we cool our batteries or motors, to really how we think about the deployment of that infrastructure to support the vehicles. Everything that we do, we really try and deliver the best service and the best products at the lowest price possible for our clients.
That's fantastic. So, I mean, this really is a holistic solution, soup to nuts, from a fleet manager looking to take their very first steps. And I think you made a good point there, too. There's often a lot of, I think, false understanding as to what it ultimately does take to electrify a fleet. I mean, you're not simply putting in a few new tanks for some diesel assets anymore. I mean, there are major upgrades required on site. And I think that it's often very much overseeing what is required to do that. Utilities just in and of themselves are one just small piece of the puzzle. So there's a lot of engineering, a lot of analysis in that. You mentioned workforce development too. Glenn, I know your team does a lot of this kind of work. Can you kind of build on what Luis was saying there and kind of talk about how your guys' companies relate to each other?
Yeah. So we too are focused on the fleet market. From our perspective, the fleet market provides really the highest opportunity in terms of predictive and high utilization of vehicles. And that's really what ultimately drives the economics of the vehicle and the infrastructure, gets your best return. So we, a couple of years ago when we founded Merge, that was really what we were focused on, is those cars, trucks, and vans that we saw coming to market that really excited us and gave us a strong case to really build a business around. Our business is really focused on infrastructure, design, deploy, and operate fleet EV infrastructure. We really do that in three pieces. There's a planning piece of really understanding the use cases of the vehicle, analyzing telematics data, and really trying to balance the vehicle, the charging, the infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure, the real estate, and the labor. Because it is kind of a systems level. You have to look at this when you build the plan for it. Once that plan's complete, deployment, which is the installation of kind of the core power, and then modular ability to expand upon that. We're a big believer that modular infrastructure for fleets makes a lot of sense. Fleets have changing use cases, they have changing vehicles, they have changing real estate. The ability to be flexible is going to be important for fleets to be able to adapt. Fleet managers we talk to are concerned that they're going to make the wrong decision and that things will change, and they're right, inevitably things will change. And then from an operations perspective, really we focus on performance management of the overall system, mission success, uptime, availability, and economics. So really measuring the total system to make sure that the customer is getting what they want, and if they're not, finding where the corrective actions and course corrections need to be.
That's a really important point you made there on flexibility. I think a lot of people feel like they are going to get locked in here if they make the wrong decision for a very long time, and I think ultimately are dragging their feet because they don't understand that there is inherent flexibility. Do you mind building on that a little bit? I feel like that is a widely undervalued topic that comes up in fleet electrification at large.
Yeah, no, we think it's really important. And I do agree with you. If people tend to get stuck, they're stuck because they're afraid to make a decision. and then it ends up being kind of capital that becomes obsolete. So, we believe it's important to really think out your plan for the long term, how you're going to get from your first charger to your last charger, what you're going to do if you have to move from AC to DC or from low power DC to high power DC, is really thinking through those scenarios and making sure that you're building a design and choosing products that can adapt to your needs. That's not necessarily in the DNA of fleet managers. Fleet managers tend to think 1 year in advance what vehicles are coming in, what vehicles are going out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This unfortunately is a more challenging situation where you've really got to think multiple years ahead and think through how am I going to convert this fleet over time, and what are the facilities implications and electrical infrastructure implications. What we're seeing right now is if you want new utility service in the U.S., you can expect a 6 to 36-month wait. So that's the planning horizon you're going to have if you want to be ready when Luis's trucks show up. What we don't want is to have no way to charge them. And unfortunately, we continue to see that happen. Not with Luis in particular, but we see many situations where fleets have EVs arriving and they really have not thought in advance about how they're going to get them charged.
I'll add to that. I mean, case in point, we're going through that now. We've got a set of trucks to deliver, and we're having to hold them back a bit because the charging infrastructure for them isn't ready. And I think the approach that folks have taken, and look, this is what we tell our customers, the approach that they've taken of sourcing vehicles from one group and then sourcing infrastructure for another, I think there's a benefit to be had of marrying those together. This is in part the relationship we're building with Glen and Merge, because ultimately what the customer truly cares about is uptime for their fleet. It's the operation. And folks who try to deliver just a piece of the puzzle and leave the client to sort out the other parts, we've seen it, no names mentioned, but we've seen it with customers struggling where they plug in their truck into the infrastructure and all of a sudden it doesn't charge. And now you're trying to find who's responsible, and obviously it's always the other party's fault, not yours. So those issues just, I find them to be dangerous because they impact the adoption and the speed of adoption of firms. And I think we're in a very important time right now. We're actually taking quite a bit of time with our customers to really act as an educator within the sort of procurement or logistics fleets to get them to understand, what the better qualities of vehicles are, what's the best use case for them, how to think about it. And one of the points that Glenn mentioned with regards to that forward planning is dealing with your grid operator and ensuring that whatever you want to roll out in terms of your capacity demand over time, you're going to be able to achieve. And Glenn and I have spoken about this at length, but it's always interesting when you think about how grid operators think in the timeline and how vehicle buyers will think of that timeline. So for a grid operator, 2-3 years is part of a normal process for getting things done. Where if you're trying to charge your trucks and you don't have that interconnection ready, that really makes a big difference. So I think the marrying of the two, and I think the demands that the rollout of EVs en masse, like we're trying to do in the world today, is going to demand not just nimbleness from the vehicle side, but also from the grid operators.
We just came back from a trade show up in Toronto just a couple of days ago, and there's a lot of discussion on standardization across these different technology platforms for a lot of those exact reasons. But I think you're right. The secret sauce here is definitely coherent, broad strategic planning for these fleets. I mean, these classic turnover cycles that they're only forward-looking 18 months at best is certainly not enough, right? It's kind of absolute what you're planning for. And, I think what sounds really unique about MegaFlux in general, too, is that there is the hardware, the OEM component of this. You guys have seemingly, at least, in-housed a big part of that headache. And so that, a lot of those interconnections, not just the interconnections with the utility, but between the dialogue that happens between EVSE and the actual the vehicles themselves are stuff you guys are now very, very experienced in because you are the ones doing the manufacturing. So, maybe talk a little bit about the reason for that business model. There are lots of depot charging companies, I think, that are also recognizing the bottlenecking utilities and trying to facilitate that. But, we don't often see, I think, this combination of the OEM side of thing as well as the strategic planning element side of the house here. Yeah. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Absolutely, and happy to add in there. And I think to understand how we arrived at the plan, you kind of have to understand the partners behind MegaFlux. So I'm one of them, and I sort of bring that project and business development and strategy side to it. My other partners, the Gottfried family, they've been manufacturing electrical equipment, again, motors for the wind industry, and several others for over 80 years. So deep experience in design, technology, and they're the ones that have incubated really the technology that we use. A third partner, sorry, is Luis Gozer. Luis was in the automotive world. She was the chief quality officer for Ford, end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s. And then she went to run Ford's manufacturing businesses and help in the deployment of all the capex of what became Ford's manufacturing plants in Mexico. So, with that experience in automobile manufacturing, which was then added on to by her working with Siemens, also now in the electrical side for many years after Ford, it really gives her and therefore the group a very unique view as to where we wanted to sit within the ecosystem. And the approach we took is to really focus on the technology of the drivetrain. So we've built our own powertrain, we build our own motors, we assemble and program and do everything our own packs, battery packs, drives. So we really get deep into the technology to ensure that we have all the controls and levers for the vehicles that we deliver, because part of the service we do is actually ensure that the vehicles are effectively configured for the function that they have to do. And I think this is one of those points that always gets lost in the electrification world, because everybody's trying to do one vehicle that does it all for everybody. But ultimately, this gets us to why we picked the space we're in. We go after, large commercial fleets who have specific needs, but also large fleets to justify the specificity or configurations that they may need. And we're able to deliver those solutions to them in a way that's customized, thoughtful, understanding their actual day-to-day use of their fleet, so that we can properly help them build not just the fleet, but the charging infrastructure to support it.
And I think that really also speaks to the custom approach you guys have on this sort of fleet kind of deployment opportunity, but also I think back to Glen's point, remaining or kind of keeping that flexibility in hand for those particular fleets is by having so much of this in-house, and this focus in-house also allows you to have a lot of that inherent flexibility. But I love that you guys have OEMs both on the light, medium, and heavy duty side of things right now. It sounded like you guys were up in Anaheim, kind of showcasing some hardware potentially, or just visiting. I'm not sure, but I'd love to kind of hear, what you think about the current state of affairs in the electrification industry today. Certainly, a lot of things changing, a lot of tailwinds, of course. But we're largely based and focused over here in California. We're starting to see a little bit more opportunity and an EV deployment up in Canada. We're starting to do some work in Vancouver and all the way over to Toronto. We're starting to see some more fleet deployment activity. A lot of utilities getting involved. But I'd love to kind of hear some feedback on what you thought of the ACT Expo at large, kind of as it relates to what you guys are doing. And then I kind of want to start talking about really the activity and what's happening south of the border here, and kind of talk largely about the electrification industry down south.
Sure. I'll start off by the industry more generally. So, my observation is, I think from a fleet perspective, we still live in a vehicle constrained phase of the market. We really don't have enough of what I'll call fleet spec vehicles that deliver fleet use cases at equal or better total cost. It continues to be a problem. ACT, there's lots of great hardware there. So many great vehicles out there, right? But if you ask, can I buy one today? Tough to get. And if you ask about the price, without substantial subsidies, the TCO, or the total cost of ownership, is pretty challenging to bite off. So, I think we're still in this vehicle constrained phase that we've been in. I'm excited with MegaFlux, because I think they're one of the many routes we can get out of this vehicle constrained phase. But there is lots of investment going in the industry. The tailwinds you talk about, whether they're regulatory at the federal or state level, and just, I think, customer demand. There is demand for these products, I think, is driving the investment to get the scalability we need in the supply chain to move us from this vehicle constrained phase to a tipping point that gets us to an infrastructure constrained phase. And when that happens, it's going to happen quickly, and it's going to happen big. I mean, my estimates just on the light duty side alone is we probably need 20,000 megawatts of charging capacity in the U.S. I'd probably double that if we include medium and heavy duty, depending on the penetration of hydrogen. to me, that's 35 to 70 billion dollars worth of infrastructure. It's an incredible investment. And at the same time, we're taking a liquids fuels market that's very efficient from the drill bit to the convenience store, and we're going to drop 3,000 utilities in the middle of it. And these utilities are very different animals than most of us are used to. They have different rules, different regulations, different incentives. So it's going to be a real challenge, I think, for us to crawl up this infrastructure curve. But from my perspective, I think we've got the vehicle thing on the run. Still got a ways to go. The tailwinds are great, but what's next for us is how we are going to manage through the infrastructure constraint that we'll face.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, not much more to add. I think Glenn hit the points perfectly. We see a limited set of competitors. We also see what you tend to see at the beginning of the industry. So, even the large OEMs are all sourcing parts from tier ones that are also sourcing other OEMs. So most of them seem to be coming out at similar price ranges, and the rollout and speed of them all seems to be kind of similar. As in many ways, they're just now really starting to come out with viable products. So we think it's going to take still many years for you to be able to have this even close to similar ecosystem as you do in ICE vehicles that is electric. But again, this is the start of a decades long effort to electrify. I think folks get very excited about electrification, and we all do. But we can't forget these are massive shifts in the composition of both our power grids and the transportation systems and all the supply chains that feed all those. So to be able to properly affect this over time, it just takes planning, it takes patience, and it's also going to take innovation. And I think what from our perspective as MegaFlux, what we see is in this transition, whenever you've seen big transitions in technology that really impacts the underlying, in this case, traction of a vehicle, there tends to be opportunities for new players to really stand out. I don't think I have to make a big announcement on this. Tesla makes the point perfectly to all of us. It wasn't around 15 years ago, and now it's leading sales in EVs globally. So I think those opportunities are what gets us excited. And I think the approach and focus that we bring to it is really just a customer-centric and customer-focused approach.
I totally agree. And, I think the going back to the geographic element here, Glenn, I know your team has worked all across the United States, but with the focus on the pending bottleneck with the utilities, the existing bottleneck with the utilities across the board right now, I think a lot of people, again, kind of focus back in California. They have some familiarity with PG&E or SCE and some of these other large utilities that are pushing electrification at large, and also started working on major electrification projects in the port ecosystems and everywhere else. But electrification is happening everywhere. You guys are applying your own business cases all over North America. All right, Glenn, I know you guys have done a lot of work all throughout the United States. So, is there any one particular area that comes to mind as a particularly a good example to follow? Or are we seeing kind of similar bottleneck headaches across the entire board, across all the different utilities and other jurisdictions that are tasked with these kinds of problems?
So I think you're seeing different levels of evolution. So we just finished some work for a customer and looked at 10 different sites across the United States. The lead times were anywhere from 6 to 36 months. They tend to get longer as you go west, I would say, as a generalization. But I don't think that's specific to any utilities process or behavior. I just think it's kind of their state of the situation. My concern is that as everybody demands more power, because it isn't just transportation. People are trying to make electric fuel or e-fuel. People are trying to make hydrogen, methanol, whatever your green thing is. There is a demand for electricity, and there is a demand for interconnects anywhere from 1 to 100 megawatts. And that's just every utility is gonna get that, and every utility is gonna have to figure out in its own way how it can best prioritize and expedite connections wherever they can.
That's a good point too. That's also something we try to reiterate all the time, in that, building managers, facility managers, fleet asset managers, CFOs, Louise, are tasked with not just replacing a fuel, but are tasked with understanding their not just fuel energy on a kilowatt hour basis, but their entire energy management across their entire operations. And that could be building side of things, or it could be on-road assets, but certainly could be off-road assets too, if they're looking to hybridized reefer units or their industrial equipment inside, or a whole host of things that they might have in their particular operation, all become part of the calculus
They
here
do.
as it relates to the wider electrification part. Absolutely. Um, Go ahead, Luis.
Oh no, I'm happy to kind of chat or add with regards to how other markets are behaving. Um, we are based in Mexico in terms of our manufacturing. We're actually a U.S. company, but our manufacturing is in Mexico. And we really decided to tackle that market first for a couple of reasons. One, because obviously it's the backyard of where my partners and where the factory's based. But also because we kind of viewed it as if we can make it work here, we really are going to be able to make it work anywhere.
Right.
Why? Because one, you don't have subsidies, and this is something that maybe gets lost for folks in the U.S. or Canada, but in the other parts of the world, there are no subsidies. So the adoption is going to be really about getting to a TCO that works on the vehicle with the technology today, not relying on subsidies to kind of bridge that gap. I think one of the other challenges that we see in Latin America is, to Glen's point, grid and interconnection availability into the medium term. And this also becomes an issue of first mover advantage because ultimately, in a certain area, let's say where many of several companies' distribution centers are, the first guys that ask for that interconnect are probably the ones that are going to get it as soon as possible. If you're the fifth or seventh guy on the line, you're going to have to wait those 36 months or longer that Glenn was mentioning. So I think that's something that we definitely make our customers aware, and I think they're starting to value and understand the impact of that. And I'll also say finally, for the clients that we work with, these are all multinationals. So we really think about coming out of Mexico really as a way to follow our clients who are usually US or European companies that are doing business down there. So the coming out of Mexico is not really our concern. Our focus has really been on ensuring that we've got the most competitive from both a efficiency and productivity side of a vehicle, but also in price. And there, I think, with that focus, we've had the ability to match or be competitive against some of the Chinese trucks coming into Mexico, which is, again, it's a tough market because, in the US, effectively nobody's buying a Chinese vehicle. But those guys have been doing what we're doing today probably 5 to 10 years ago. So they're quite a bit ahead of the curve, and they've got some competitive products that just for geopolitical reasons aren't making it into the US today. But as we compete with them there, we've had to get smart and creative in finding ways that, since we don't have the scale or deep pockets that they do today, really be able to entice a client. So this is why our business model grew to supporting the client through a transition and a lot more of that hand-holding, which we've realized in time is something very much needed by them and something that customers look for.
Yeah, that totally unbelievably accurate. And I think also I love the concept of starting in a particular market because if you are the first market mover in that jurisdiction, you are light years ahead of everyone else. We've heard of very similar companies test driving new business models in the Midwest of the US, where you probably wouldn't expect folks to work on electrification efforts for years gone out, but they're finding ways to make it work. And it's not just conceptually, it also, right? I mean, there are some physical differences between those different markets as well. I mean, the traffic complexity and speeds are different. I mean, all of that is highly more complex, right? Can you speak to that a little bit as it relates to your own OEM efforts?
Sure, absolutely. What we see with our clients, and when you kind of think of Mexico and the job of delivering, we typically work with food and beverage companies, so soft drinks, beer, or potato chips. In the context of a very large urban area like a Mexico City, where you have also a lot of smaller drop sites. So the complexity from logistics, and this has nothing to do with electrification, this is just the quality of this market. And it was the same, has been the same, even with diesel trucks. But getting to deliver small volumes across a long route with lots of stopping and starting, actually, we found that that's a great function for electric vehicles. So we are going after those markets, not just because we like the customers, but because our products can really stand out in that setting. And it's these differences that also, if you kind of think about it and think about your client's needs and look at them from that perspective, really give you the edge in terms of providing a product that actually, or a vehicle that actually serves their needs best.
And Glenn, tell me a little bit too about what you're seeing in other types of markets. Are you guys also doing your sort of work in Latin America in the same sort of way in amongst this kind of partnership and seeing same sort of problems, but maybe also similar opportunities?
Not nearly as much as Luis is, certainly in Mexico. I think what we're observing is similar grid bottlenecks exist everywhere. And if they're not there yet, they will be, just at the rate that people, there's kind of a run on the grid that's starting to happen.
Hmm.
And at the rate people are trying to consume capacity, we're going to have challenges everywhere in terms of, it's not generation challenges. We can build more generation. It's ultimately the
Right.
distribution challenge. It's getting
Right.
that power the last mile that really is going to be our biggest part of the problem, from the substation down the poles, into the customer site. When it comes to use cases, I can't emphasize enough how important use cases are. And Luis's example there is a great one. Is you know beverage delivery in Mexico is very different than beverage delivery in the United States. It's night and day different. If you try to copy those, you'll get the wrong answer. Really understanding your customer specific use case, how the vehicles get driven, where they spend their time, how long they idle, when they stop, where they go, is critical to really designing that complete solution between the vehicle and the infrastructure. And I think that transcends every market. With electric, you really have to understand the use case far more than you do with liquid fuels. Liquid fuels, you get a lot more flexibility. With electric right now, you really need to make sure that you're deploying the right infrastructure and the right vehicle into the right use case at the right time.
We had a good long discussion over this conference in Toronto about telematics and the need for data ahead of electrification efforts, or at least to evaluate if that would be a good idea for that very purpose. There, Glenn, is that something that you're often finding? Is that there's just frankly a lack of data already available, or is there data often available from a lot of fleets, or how does one go about even understanding that they do have the ability to evaluate that particular use case or that understand their duty cycle in a way where they can answer those particular questions?
Yeah, we find telematics are most prevalent in what I'll call kind of blue collar activities, delivery and service. It's not as much in white collar sales and kind of field engineering. But where we do see the data, we also see it kind of underutilized, to be honest with you. I can't
Hmm.
tell you how many times we're talking to a fleet manager who doesn't know how to log into whatever their telematics platform is. They typically are looking for speed alerts and collision alerts that come some way. So I think it's really an underutilized asset that a lot of companies have to really take that data and do the analysis on it and understand which vehicles make sense to electrify first, right? Which ones should we wait on? Where does the charging infrastructure need to go? How much do we need? I think some employees get worried that it's very big brother-ish, but to me, it's really helping you understand how to optimize the asset you have and figure out where to make the investments in the asset you want.
Absolutely. We see the same thing. When we start talking to customers, first things we ask are exactly those questions. Do you have data on your fleet? What are you running? So when we think about the vehicle that is optimal for them, it'll be designed based on their actual use. And this is something that's very telling. So for example, we found that for one of our customers, their typical routes were about 50 kilometers a day. The longest one that they would run is 80 kilometers a day. So when they're thinking about purchasing a truck and they're thinking about range, and again, all these trucks come back home at night, you've got your own charging infrastructure, so you don't really have that range anxiety. It's really about hitting, your minimum range plus call it a little bit of a safety margin to allow for degradation over time and whatnot. But you find that you may be getting to 120, 130 kilometers that you need, and then you look at the vehicle offerings and they're coming out today with 250 kilometers or 200 miles. In which case you're buying a whole more battery than you really need and paying for it today. So this is what data gets you. It gets you to actually understand the problem in depth and really craft a solution that optimizes it for the client and the end use that truck's going to receive. And we take this to really across everything we do. We always try and do everything data focused and derived of what we find there. And I think over time, one of the things we want to spend a lot more time is mining that data and helping customers really be able to use it more effectively. Because Glenn's point is very good. A lot of folks have the data, they generate it, or they have the interfaces through a telematics system, but ultimately aren't mining it and putting it to proper use. So I think that's one of the functions that we'll look to invest in over the coming years, to really be able to deliver something that is useful, effective, and really drives just cost savings ultimately, which is what clients are looking for.
Well, and I think one of the real great things about MegaFlux is, you look at that data and they can optimize a powertrain for your needs, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
great.
Yeah.
That their expertise is optimizing those powertrains. Our expertise is optimizing the infrastructure, and those are really the two things you got to bring together for that use case that's largely defined in that telematics data if they have it.
Yeah, can't
Exactly.
can't measure what you can't manage. No,
That's exactly, yeah,
can't
Exactly.
manage what you can't measure. Is the right way to say that. Absolutely. So we always reiterate that as well. It's you got to be able to get some data on hand as soon as possible. It doesn't require a big investment to be able to start making coherent decisions on what to do with the existing fleet, and it goes well beyond just understanding what your fuel consumption is or
yeah, yeah.
simple VMT or mileage based data is on
Yep.
a lot of classic existing legacy fleets. So just looking forward a little bit, Glenn, I saw some cool news online. You guys are launching something called Fleet Scription. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And then Luis, I'd love to hear a little bit more. Just tell me a few minutes on what's on the short-term horizon here for you guys.
Yeah, so I'll kick it off. So yeah, our fleet subscription product was really designed for fleet managers to get their toe in the water with EVs. The idea is to package up the vehicle and the charging that's required, which can be home, depot, and public charging wrapped together in a way that's just simple for them to deploy and to begin learning. One of the things we find is that even if they have the data, sometimes fleets are resident to believe in it. They really want to see how the truck walks, talks, and acts. They want to know what their employees have to say about it. They want to see how it works in their operations. So our fleet subscription product provides them the flexibility to deploy a vehicle as a wrap package, and then provides off ramps if that vehicle isn't working out for them. But ideally, we're looking for them to build the learnings that give them the confidence to really figure out the whole plan. For us, it's part of the book learning, certainly out of the data, but the real world learnings of hands-on make a big difference. And we've seen that with our pilot customers, is that feedback is an important input to building your longer term plan, because drivers are important. We can't forget that. At the end of the day, the drivers control a lot of the success that we're going to have with electrification, and really making sure the drivers are brought along and have their input is critically important.
Absolutely, just making sure that everything is crystal clear for those drivers, for the operators of these systems, not is in addition to ensuring things are affordable is absolutely key. Luis, tell me what's going on with MegaFlux in the next 6, 12 months.
So we're working on a whole bunch of different areas, but continuing to expand our product offering, if you will, as we prototype new vehicles or different or alternative use cases for our powertrains. If you kind of want to think about it from the way the MegaFlux thinks about it, is we have three architectures that support all the vehicles we do, and these are sort of the smaller, the call it medium, and call it the heavy duty powertrains. So each one of these powertrains is configured so that you can optimally hit everything from class 2 all the way to class 8. And as we continue to build these out, we're scoping out and really prototyping different vehicles within each of those classes and building out our product offering so we can do everything from low bed to dry box to stakes, everything that a customer may need. We're also we've already been working with a financial partner that's financing our financing our fleet, and we're continuing to solidify that into a partnership in the near term. We're always thinking about the next capital need, so my role demands I have to be thinking about those things all the time, and we are in the process also of fundraising. So lots of things going on. We're super busy with all the different angles of the business. And what we continue to see is just growing interest from customers. And we are really trying to build a business to get us ready for when we get to that mass adoption stage. And more importantly, what we would love to do is to be able to help accelerate that mass adoption stage. And in a way, one of the things we're doing is we're coming out with the concept called Everhaul. Everhaul really relates to the retrofitting and maximizing the life of your chassis. So I'll try and explain it this way. If you look at other transportation modes called the rail industry or the airline industry, you have a separation of the assets, both from, in the airline world, you have the frame of the airplane and then you have the engines. And these get treated differently. They have different lives, And whenever you're going to change an engine, you don't change the whole plane.
Right.
Now, we've grown up in a world where we've been drilled and educated to change the whole vehicle whenever we have a problem or an issue with an engine. Now, that doesn't need to be the case. And if you start looking at economics, so a typical TCO or total cost of ownership analysis, which for those who don't know, that's basically the net present value of all the costs of operating a vehicle over its life. You get to significant improvements when you retrofit or give a second breath of life to a vehicle that's now, 5, 7, or 10 years old, and you extend that life for another 10 years for the same owner. So
Right.
they don't have to buy a new one, they don't have to replace a cargo box, and obviously you have to make sure that these vehicles are safe and that they're structurally good. So we go through a process of validating all that. But when you're able to retrofit that truck, you really get another 10 years of use for it. And that not only goes to improving your TCO, but your decarbonization goals get accelerated significantly because you're just not having to pay for another full chassis. And we find all these pockets are really there, and this is what keeps us going and excited every day.
Just a couple things going on in your world right now. Yeah, retrofits are extremely important in this dialogue. Also, something I feel like it doesn't get quite enough attention. You're totally right. The concept of repowering Class 8 trucks has kind of been around for a little while, but that idea, whereby, the OEM engine might have, 400,000 miles on it, but that chassis can go for a couple million if it's treated correctly, right? That's the sort of thinking should absolutely apply to all the other vehicle classifications out there, I think, and it's a good example of how that should work.
Well, Todd, I think it works particularly well in medium and heavy duty because they were really designed to be repowered, right?
Yep.
They were built to have new engines put in them. And I think one important thing to remember is, in decarbonization, timing matters. And I think repowering allows us to move more quickly. You're not waiting, there's not a lot of bottlenecks. So, I think there's just so many good axes of a repowering program that make a lot of sense in medium and heavy duty.
Yeah, a lot of great interim steps that I think could be taken in the meantime. And also helps you save a few headaches on registration details and other things that already come along with that particular chassis. The operators are already familiar with it. But all in all, part of the wider strategy, both I think all of your particular customers are in very, very good hands around the planning elements of all things electrification. So fantastic to hear about what you guys are up to. Quite exciting to see where you guys will be taking this in the next couple of years. If anyone was interested in taking a little bit deeper dive on MegaFlux and also on Merge, where is a best place to point them to?
From our perspective, you can access a lot of information about us on our website, megaflux.com. Please reach out to us. We'd be happy to engage with you and see how we can be helpful to your organization.
And how about Merge, Glenn?
Yeah, our website's a good place to start, mergefleet.com. We put a lot of content on LinkedIn, a lot of our experiential studies, a lot of the data we've gathered and things that we've seen in the market. So I would encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn. We've got tons and tons of content out there as well.
Fantastic. All right, Luis Barreto from MegaFlux and Glen Stancil from Merge Fleet. I really appreciate you guys jumping onto the Charge Cycle today, talking through what you guys are up to and where you're headed. Some very unique business models. I'm very excited to see where they all go. To those listening, we'll put some links for you in the show notes. And otherwise, we will see you guys next time. Luis, Glenn, thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate it.
Thanks.